I think that should have done it. Okay, so I guess to start off, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Jess. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the branch coordinator for Sexpression St Andrews, which is one branch of the national charity who provides sex ed and relationship kind of education in schools and youth groups. And I will pass over to Anna-Ruth, who has helped me organise this.
Hi, I'm Anna-Ruth. I'm the SRC Disability Officer, and so I chair and convene the St Andrews Disabled Students Network.
Brilliant. Should we go to Greysen next?
Hello, I'm Greysen. I use any pronouns, but if that's confusing for you, you can just call me they. And I am currently sitting on the Saints LGBT committee as the trans and non-binary officer.
Brilliant, thank you. And then let's go to Anna.
Hiya, I'm Anna. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm co-founder of Split Banana, and we run sex and relationship education workshops with young people, and we also train educators to do sex ed better as well.
That's so cool. I would love to talk to you more after this.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, I've got you down as Enhance the UK. Sorry, could you just remind me of your name?
No, I'm Jen. I'm the CEO of Enhance the UK. I use pronouns she, her, and I am, Enhance UK is a disability charity, and we look at the sexual needs of disabled people. So empowering people to have sexual expression, whatever that may mean to them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, all of you, for getting involved. I'm really glad that we've got kind of a variety of different experiences and backgrounds here. So I'm really excited to get going on this. And yeah, I don't know if Anna-Ruth mentioned, but this is a project that I started working on last year, and then due to circumstances, it got postponed. So I'm really happy to be doing it now. So yeah, thank you everyone for getting involved. So I guess to start off with, we'll have a little chat about sex education. So firstly, kind of talking about personal backgrounds, did you get any information about sex and disabilities in your own experiences of sex ed?
I can start.
Yeah, sounds good.
I forgot to say as well, my pronouns are she or they. No, that's the short answer. That's a simple answer. I think that in terms of formal sex education, my personal experience is lacking any discussion of disability, or indeed any kind of LGBT issues or anything like that as well. I think that there is other sex education that I've received through other means, like online and at university. But I think certainly, you know, if I hadn't had access to those resources or known about them, then that's not necessarily something that I would have had access to.
Yeah, absolutely. Would anyone? Oh yeah, Greysen.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. I feel like for me personally, they did do non-abstinence only educations. Like, I was taught to use protection, but I wasn't taught any like non-normative things about sexuality. So yeah, I'm a queer person, obviously, but I also have disabilities, and in a way it socially further separates you, and it further makes you less able to contribute because they don't want to give you that ability. It feels like they kind of want to keep you in a place where they can understand you and it's safe, and I find that really troubling. So like, yeah, I fully agree with Anna-Ruth, like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, from my point of view, I mean, God, I'm 41. I can't remember, you know. I mean, we didn't, you know, I don't remember any sex education. I mean, I'm sure we had some very basic sex education, but I don't know if anyone knows the book Judy Blume, Forever by Judy Blume. It was my shining light. I remember I was reading it from page to page to page when I was like 11 years old or something, and my mum was going, wow, she's reading a lot, wow. And everyone else was like borrowing this book, you know, it was completely battered, and it was actually just talking about sex, but you know, but inadvertently, and that's how I learned, you know. And people were borrowing this book from me, because you know, this is I mean, it's such a big thing now, but then it really wasn't spoken about. It was very, very basic, and I can't even remember the condom on a banana thing. I mean, I don't even remember that happening at all, and certainly my parents didn't speak to me about it. So to me, sex education is something that's kind of in the abyss somewhere. I don't even remember it happening, and I think lots of people my age, which is the problem, you know, are older and actually really haven't had any sex education at all, let alone non-inclusive sex education, kind of no sex education or very basic. So I think that's the thing about older people actually also needing some kind of sex education, and realizing it's not just for young people, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many good points, and I really want to speak to all of them. But firstly, I really like Greysen's point about non-normative sex ed. Like, I didn't really have any sex ed either. I think my main sex ed was I had quite a lot of trauma when I was a teenager around sex, so then I kind of had to like learn about things, and I think that's where my real sex education came in, and that was actually ended up mainly being through being able to access free mental health services, and that was when I basically had the sex ed that everyone should have without having to have trauma. But I think all the things that are all the sex education which isn't normative and heteronormative and all this stuff, I still feel like it just doesn't really exist, and the main places it does exist is all online, I would say, as well, or like I think podcasts, actually I often find loads on there, but it's still so limited offline, like almost entirely. And having to educate teachers is something that we find really hard as well, because you are saying like, oh, you should teach this, and then they don't even have the kind of foundational knowledge to be able to teach it, so it's actually really difficult to do that.
And the confidence as well, they don't have the confidence. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's not spread across the board, so you get varying degrees of quality, which is massively part of the problem in most countries, but in this country.
I found being like on a committee like Saints LGBT and just in general participating in the LGBT community over the years and everything, a big part of your job ends up being sex ed for LGBT, particularly gender, queer or trans people, because it's just not talked about at all. And I honestly think if I was not part of the community, I would know next to nothing. You know, I know like very basic heterosexual, how X happens and then you get X result, you know, but I don't know, I really doubt I would have had really any sex ed that was pertinent to me if I wasn't, you know, very active in the LGBT community and taking roles in which I actually have to be like the conveyor of that information.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to be very active, should you? Because that should be the choice. Because lots of people don't want to be very active, and some people don't want to be part of a community. You know, you're kind of forced into being part of a community to understand information, and that's not helpful. It should be all the way through. It should be a choice of how much you pick up or get involved, but there should be this steady stream of information that people that are readily available. And I think, Greysen, you said you're absolutely right about. Well, we say kind of keeping particularly disabled people in a very childlike asexual state. So I mean, and that's just a common, again, it depends, even you're going from children all the way up to adults in care settings. That's again very, very much across the board. It doesn't matter how old you are, you're just pretty asexual. And sex education to me isn't just one thing in schools, it's just bigger than that. It needs to be bigger than that and recognized, but it's not. It's just not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's quite a nice introduction into my next question, which was, how do you think sex education could be improved, whether that's making it more inclusive or, like you say, kind of continuing it not just in school, Yeah, does anyone have any ideas about how we can go about improving sex education?
I'm happy to begin with that one. This is what I think about pretty much every day. I think my main thing, which kind of links to what Jennie said, is we're still stuck in this idea of like the chat, or like this one-off conversation, or this like one-off session that you have to learn everything you're going to ever need to know about sex and relationships. And we need to have it far more embedded in everything. So what makes me excited is the idea of being able to teach teachers to be able to put it in all their subjects and like bring out these things and have it throughout across the curriculum. So I think that is something that I would like to see. And again, like going back to the normativity and the heteronormativity, and I think like showing that there is no normal at all, and how the idea of normal and normativity harms literally everybody. And then the other thing for me as well is, I think there can still be a temptation in schools to teach to like who's in the class. So if you do have a disabled child in your class, then you'll be like, oh, now we have to do the disability sex ed. Or if you have a queer child in your class, you're like, now we have to do this. And instead, what we encourage people to think is like, it's not just, it's about all the interactions that person's going to have and all the possibilities, like amazing relationships they could have throughout their life. It's not, you want to keep it open for everybody. And so in a way, it's like, it's really good to know the identities you have in your class, but you can't, and you also can't guess what's going to happen in someone's life. So really treating it like everyone's going to experience these things at some point is a better starting point from like, oh, you only need to learn about this because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's why, I mean, that's why we've really enjoyed working with you guys, because it's been really, really important that it's not just, if you're educating, non-disabled children, but you're not educating disabled children, then you've got, and then or the other way round. And actually, more importantly, I think the other way round, because if you're trying to empower all these people with various different impairments, and then they go out to the outside world and it's brutal out there, and then there are people, say on Tinder or whatever it is now, you're swiping or whatever, and they see someone with a disability, then you're setting people up to fail, because they don't understand. And so regularly, my friends and my colleagues, just walking down the street just before lockdown, I was walking down the street with my two of my colleagues, husband and wife. Dan's got cerebral palsy, and Becky's got restricted growth. Somebody came towards us. We thought it was the taxi, and the guy came towards us and he said to Becky, if I stick my dick in you, will it go up through your mouth? He seemingly thought that was sociable, that what, and in front of her husband, who could then do nothing, it was just awful. And I'd love to say that's a one-off. It's not. My friends and colleagues get things said really, to a really abusive extent all the time. Disability hate crime on another level. So you're absolutely right. And this education needs to happen across the board, regardless to whether whoever you've got in your class. That it needs to be a constant narrative, so it's embedded in people's mind and go, oh yeah, actually that's really important. It's insane that this isn't happening.
And I think that can often come up with like body image stuff, because it's been co-opted by kind of white, non-disabled, slim, pretty women. It's still, you see that within a lot of educational resources, how it's about like loving yourself, just love yourself, and you're like, if you're being literally abused and really facing these things, it's a really slightly pointless exercise just to teach people to love themselves more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you that like if we incorporated it into all areas of education, it'd be so much more useful or helpful. And you don't even have to be like, and now we're at the sex ed portion, because we spend, I'm a history student, and we spend so much time focusing on, people who are considered non-normative being scapegoated and being harmed and being put down and seen as less than or other. But then why are we not also studying the history of them, being raised up? Like, why did I not hear about, people climbing up the steps in my history classes? Why did I find that for myself? And just things like, it's so easy to incorporate the history of sexuality or the history of contraception into a normal modern history class. And it's something that is, hugely socially significant. So the fact that we don't is baffling as is. You know, sex ed and access to materials makes such a difference no matter who you are at any point in time. And I think adding in all the extra bits that make it, you know, comprehensive and make it inclusive shouldn't be seen as an extra step of making it comprehensive and inclusive. It's just conveying the actual information without purposefully leaving things out. And it's rarely unfair that, you know, you have to go into interactions and be like, oh, was this person in the correct classroom, you know? Yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents on that. I just really appreciated what you guys had to say.
Yeah, can I just say, I think we've touched on this before, but I don't think it's just about doing this under the frame of sex education, because I don't think that the vast majority of like negative sexual experiences I've had because of my disability are actually because that person like necessarily had a lack of sex education or a lack of ability to have like conversations about consent, for instance. You know, a lot of these people were generally quite good at those things in other circumstances. I think for me, even the very best partners I've had, what it is I say, I have chronic pain, don't touch me here, it hurts, or you know, I have weakness, I can't do this thing or something. And then they like go like that because they're like, I'm gonna break you. And they have this kind of idea that I haven't just provided a very simple instruction as to what to do and everything will be fine. Because, you know, it's that kind of infantilizing view of disabled people, or this idea that we need to be looked after, or as well just like the fear about what happens if something goes wrong, that puts people off, and those things are almost separate from the sex education side of it. These things are things that they happen all the time, but they infiltrate like specifically into our sexual experiences, I think, when we have to have these difficult conversations. And I think if we have a greater education about disability and how to have conversations about disability and the boundaries related to it, and you know, break the stigma that like no one's going to break me if they touch me where it hurts, it would just be a bit sore, like, you know, these things would just significantly improve, I think, our experiences overall. You know, and that needs to be done alongside any kind of inclusive sex education, because I don't think it would solve the problem alone.
Oh, can I jump in there if I may? I mean, you're absolutely right. And Enhance UK was set up exactly like that, like a social enterprise, really, because, I mean, it was, 11 years ago now, that I was working in care homes, and I was like recognising that, you know, these things were happening, and friends of mine wanted to go out and date. And how Enhance UK was born is a colleague of mine woke up one morning and he's lost his sight completely in one eye. And then his other eye went a few weeks later. And he wanted to, after a while, you know, after about 7 or 8 months, he was like, I need to get back. He lost everything. I need to still feel fit, Jen. I need to go back. And I said, right, okay, you go down the gym. I'm rubbish. You know, he was a gym instructor, and he now is the first blind registered gym instructor in the whole of the UK on the front of Men's Health. But he wanted to go down, and I said, right, you teach me how to use the equipment, and I'll be your sighted guide. And that is really how Enhance UK was born, because it's like, right, okay, we can support each other. He wanted to meet people and go out and meet women, and the people that they thinking that he should be set up with are actually people that James would never normally find attractive. And being in the gym, well, it was quite funny because we had James, he had his guide dog by then, and our friend Tom, who's got dyspraxia, Aaron's got a hearing impairment. So we were on this running machine. Tom and I were signing to each other in the reflection in the mirror. The guide dog was sitting down. The team in the gym were like, oh my God, this is a health and safety nightmare. And actually, you know, we were on the stretch mat, and I said, we need to educate people outside, forget about the sex and relationships and sexual identity. You know, expression, we need to educate people. So what is sexual expression to you? What does that mean? To me, it is going to be different to all of you. To me, getting my nails done is really important to me. So for me to be able to access going into a nail bar, that's important to me. Getting my hair done, whatever it is. And that's exactly it. It's about educating way more than just the sex word and what that actually means. It's about kind of going overall to, for me, going to work, making me feel good about myself, earning my own money, having my independence, being my own woman, all of those things makes me feel empowered and good about myself, to get to the point where I choose the right partners or wrong partners a lot of the time, actually, depending on what's happening. But it's a bigger picture than that, and it needs to be recognized as that. And education all the way through is always the key, because you don't know what you don't know. And I don't believe those people are horrible people who think they're going to break you. Most people are coming from a good place. Most people are. They're scared about saying the wrong thing. And I think it's about saying, it's cool if you say the wrong thing. You're not always going to get it right. I'm not going to have a go at you. Let's talk it through. But people are scared about getting hit over the head with a PC hammer and messing it up, so they don't, let alone physically, so they don't do anything.
Yeah, just like, I guess, speaking to both of those points, I was already diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but I didn't get my diagnosis for fibromyalgia until this past winter, maybe a little bit earlier, like late autumn. And I was really struggling with that, and I had a long-term partner at the time. And I found, because it was something we were dealing with together and learning about together, it was so much more of a satisfying experience, and it made all areas of our relationship better at the time. Because, when you understand someone and you can have those conversations, everything improves. And I just think incorporating more of that into our idea of what a good partnership is, or a good friendship, that necessity to understand someone and to take their own issues on, not as your own, but as something you consider when you're with them, is something that I think should be like encouraged universally. And a great way to do that is to start by teaching people basics of how to interact with less abled people, or just how to, interact with someone that they want to be friends with but don't necessarily understand. I mean, it can be almost elementary to the level of basic you can start it at, and then, teach so much more as people get older, and it just wholly elevates understanding and our ability as communities to support one another. If, as we go on all the way, we're learning about all these different things.
Yeah, and I think you could summarize, really, if you wanted to summarize disability awareness training and the training that we do with lots of corporate organizations, Northern Rail, for example, the conductors we train, and football clubs. If you want to condense it all, you don't say empathy, not sympathy. And the thing is, you can't always teach empathy. You can't. And sometimes people do. And I think it's those people that are literally lacking empathy, which is not very many people, but, and if you don't know, have the confidence to ask, saying, what hurts you? What is painful, and let's communicate how you let me know, so I don't have to keep asking you all the time, and having the confidence just to keep putting it back onto that person and checking in. You could literally summarize all training just to that: empathy, not sympathy, keep asking the person. But that isn't as easy as it sounds, because people have to discipline themselves to be able to get that confidence to be able to do that. And that, you can do it. It just takes a little bit of training and a little bit of a way of talking things through to be able to feel confident to do it.
Yeah, and I feel like part of the core problem is that our culture, even though empathy, not sympathy, should be the answer, and so many people have the capacity for it, our culture teaches sympathy as the reactionary response. It never teaches like the sit back and be like, okay, how can I support you? It teaches the how can I fix you?
It's the medical model of disability.
Yeah, like a kind of foot on the pedal. You need to drive things forward and make a change, and sometimes that's not within capacity. Sometimes it's just, let's sit with this. And I think there's a lot of cultural pressure to always be moving forward, and I think that probably ties into, even if someone's like, oh, I feel awful that you're experiencing this, because I imagine it's hard, maybe it's not exactly sympathy, but it's a drive to not let it be, and I think it's a very Western cultural thing that maybe we need to consider more when we have any of these conversations.
And I do think that, sorry, I'm kind of stepping out of my role as moderator here, but some of, at least my experience has been that people get a bit uncomfortable about talking about disability. So having that open conversation, and like, I personally like to talk about it a lot. It normalizes it in my head. It took a long time to get a diagnosis, so being able to talk about it, especially a disability that is invisible and caused by trauma, being able to talk about it openly is a very important thing. And unfortunately, a lot of people get uncomfortable and feel like they either can't talk about it or feel like you shouldn't be talking about it, even as the person experiencing it. And I think that is putting such a limitation on the way that people can react, people can improve their understanding, things like that. I think really comes down to that discomfort in talking about disability.
Yeah, and it's okay. I think that's the thing. It's saying it's okay to feel uncomfortable. You know, it's okay to stumble across your words sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, because it isn't. If you are not surrounded by disabled people, if you're not surrounded by people in the LGBT community, then it's going to feel uncomfortable for you, and it's about kind of go, that's all right, you know,
Yeah.
that's cool, but just don't be close-minded to it. And actually I am going to speak about it, and it's about moderating it as well. How I'd speak to my dad, for example, is completely different to how I'd speak with you guys. And I think the problem lays sometimes is when, well, I know the problem lays is you always get very kind of militant people in every kind of community. And I think that's really dangerous, and it's really it's not helpful, because then you get people ramming it down people's throats, and you get certainly people of the older generation going, I don't know what to say, I'm too scared of saying anything, so I'm going to say nothing at all. I don't know what to say anymore, I keep getting it wrong. And that's really problematic. And I think it's about, again, embedding, is right what we said right at the beginning, it's about embedding it straight from the off in all, not just sex education, but sex education per se, exactly what you said, Greysen. It's not just about sex education, it's in education, it's what we learn, embedding it. And actually, more importantly probably than anything, we're such a visual generation, about seeing it. And yes, there's more disabled people on social media, yes, but that's only if you're choosing to follow those particular people. If you actually just look generally, it's not there. And now you're seeing, you know, if you choose to look at it, you see some amazing people, you know, doing fitness and, you know, being really, really proud of it, but you have to search. So why is that not being represented? And dare I say, even in some of the well-known sex education organisations in this country, the big ones, which we've worked with, there's no representation there. There's no representation of disability at all. And obviously not all disabilities are physical disabilities, mine isn't. And you can't always show it a sensory impairment. However, there's got to be some kind of representation or some kind of mention of it. And even with us as advisors of some of these organisations, I'm not going to name and shame, but you can probably guess the big ones, they still didn't take that on and spent millions on their campaigns. It's like, that's not okay. And that is when I do feel a bit kind of militant like, actually, and go, we've been really nice to you for 5 years, and now I'm going to shout at you, actually, because this isn't okay. Yeah, but media is a big thing. People need to see that they're being represented, and if they don't, again, it comes back to lack of self-worth. Well, if no one wants to see me on the telly or media, then I must be really ugly. No one will want me. That's a horrible way to feel.
I am so glad you brought up representation. You are perfectly moving us through these points, so thank you for that. Because my next question was going to be about representation. So I guess opening up to everyone else, a few questions that I think we can kind of lump into one is, firstly, do you see sex and disability in the media? Is it a positive representation? Is it fetishizing? Yeah, what have your experiences been with representation of sex and disability?
Yeah, I think it depends what media you're talking about. So I think that there is media online that represents sex and disability and what I see to be a kind of positive and I mean, I don't think normals, I don't know what the right word to use would be, but like almost like a normal way, like it is part, how I would experience it as part of my life. But I think that, you know, there's also so much media, and I think particularly in traditional media, that has problematic elements. So I have seen like fetishization of disability, but I think more importantly, like traditional media, when we talk about sex or the sexuality of disabled people, or even disabled people in relationships, tends to take a kind of pity perspective, or a perspective like it's some kind of problem or something, or inspiration porn. And I think that for me is one of the things I find most isolating, because I think that personally, I feel like I can almost cope with my disability being fetishized, and I can well explain why I think that that is like problematic in some instances, or not something that I like personally participate in. But trying to explain why that depiction of relationships is so isolating to me, and why that is something that like plays into my experiences, is something that I find so much more difficult. And I think it is something that kind of paints disabled people like the norm is that they should be alone. And I think that's something that is quite isolating for so many of us, is when the norm is set in traditional media that we should be alone. You know, how do you break out of that, and how do you teach people that it should be another way, or that I am capable of a relationship. And I think that's kind of, I think, the major issue with kind of representation in media. And I think as well, when disability is like generally discussed in traditional media, outside of the framing of it, it's often discussed in like certain kinds of disability. So I think that you know, while I've seen a few depictions of, say, like wheelchair users, or you know, autistic people, for instance, I don't see any, you know, invisibly disabled person ever discuss how that, or like with a disability like mine, with something like chronic pain, ever discuss how that impacts their sex life. And I think that's something that's isolating in itself as well, because how can I explain that my disability is something that affects my sex life when everyone's view of how disability affects that kind of thing is built on specific kinds of disabilities, and they can't like frame that anymore or understand it. And I think that's something that also needs to be worked on kind of in media.
It's a huge thing though, isn't it? Again, I mean, we've got I've got a very real example. So I've been working with a sex toy company for the last 2.5, 3 years, and we are creating an accessible sex toy range. And so we've had focus groups working on this, and the launch of the sex toy range is going to be the 14th of February. And so in between this, I've been working with documentary makers. Gone through 3 lots of documentary makers, because because everyone wants it, everyone's rubbing their hands together saying, oh, but I was actually part of initially getting the Undateables commissioned years ago, and we pulled out of it. It was never meant to be how the Undateables is now, and we pulled out of it because I got a phone call when I was in the I was just about to get on a plane actually, and I said, oh, the name of the show is going to be called The Undateables. I was like, what now? And it's nothing, what it's like is nothing like it originally was meant to be. And I'm really glad that we pulled out of that. But more importantly, I mean, one of the names of the documentary, one documentary wanted to name this documentary was Disabled Wankers. Let's just leave that hanging there. Oh yeah. You know, and you just think, when you are trying to put things in the mainstream media, you've got to be so careful. And I'm tentatively stepping the whole way. And this documentary's gone up to the highest bit now. The budget's been approved. It's with the commissioner, with Channel 4. It's kind of thinking it's ready to go. I'm so nervous about it, because in one way, we need to do this. We need to look at everything that we're talking about now. But on the other hand, one false move and it can wipe out all the work that we've been doing for the last 11 years plus. So it's really hard, because most of the time, anything, you're right, it's either about devotees or fetish, or it's about sex workers, disabled men using sex workers. That's normally what it's about. And all the phone calls, we probably get a phone call from the media, I'd say at least once a month, at least. and it's about sex workers. And that's fine. If that's your choice, that's absolutely fine. But that shouldn't be the only thing that's ever discussed when it comes to disability and sex. And that's that's what people come to us for. It's really boring. It's so, but and I feel like you're not bored of this, talking about the same thing. There's loads of other things to talk about. So yeah, it needs to be pushed out, but it needs to be handheld the whole way to be able to do that. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's
I
not going to
feel
be
like,
called disabled wankers, FYI.
I feel like that this isn't directly speaking to media representation, but it's more like reception of representation. So I work in a cafe that's a social enterprise. Nearly everyone faces employment barriers, specifically cognitive barriers. We have a lot of people who are autistic or on the spectrum, and some level of physical barriers. That's a lot less common because it's a cafe. And they don't hire people who are less abled, which is but it's a really great place because it's a place where all these people are constantly consuming media about themselves or other people like them, and you still end up in these awkward situations or conversations where someone who has another disability than you will say, oh well, I don't even feel disabled, and it's like, well, and they make it sound like disabled people shouldn't feel disabled, they should feel completely normal all the time. And I'm like, well, I do feel disabled sometimes, like as someone with like a physical disability, like there are times when I can't get out of bed, and it is disheartening, and I do feel like I'm not up to the task. And I think the fact that even when you're in spaces with people that do all of these social practices and all of these different like schemes and stuff, to understand, when you're in those situations, people still like have these go-to catchphrases that they get from the media, or like a certain view of what disability alters your life to be like. I think the fact that that happens in that kind of environment is really telling, and it's not a problem of we can't even talk about it here, because it's a good thing we're talking about it. It's a good thing that like it's an environment where you can say, actually I disagree, and this is how I experience it. But the fact that in an environment like that, where disability is quite central to the project itself, having people with cognitive disabilities or other access barriers, when you're in that environment and there's still such a lack of diversity in the knowledge they bring to the table, that's kind of when that like, oh, it isn't just all of the abled people not doing their research. It's an entire sociocultural construct of like what we're fed and what we aren't fed, and it's not like something that just able-bodied people need to work on and that we need to throw this at able-bodied people. It's more of a collaborative project, and I think that's something that as Jen was talking about earlier, you moderate your discussion to your audience. I think it's important to think about, we are all the audience as well. Like, of course, we're going to moderate to who we're talking to, but it doesn't have to be just we're educating other people. It can be we're in this like collaborative educational experience and representational experience of, the reason why we get weird things like disabled wankers is because there's just a lack of understanding and a lack of conversation. And that's something I would say.
People want lulls out of it.
Yeah. It's like, and it's something that in my workplace,
thrills.
Some people would laugh at it, but you don't want to make laughing at disability the norm,
Exactly. Exactly. I think and sorry, this is the last thing I'll say on this, because it's just directly what you were saying about this, even kind of normalizing it, or people feeling sorry for, or kind of, I mean, all you have to do is look on Boots, right? And there's an advert, and like there's always advert for like Boots, and they've got different glasses and different kind of glasses, and it's really cool. Some people wear glasses with no glass in them, like it's a fashion statement. On Boots, they've got an advert, And this woman puts her hearing aid in and she said, "This is a little secret between you and me." That's on the telly now. You know, is so much shame around wearing hearing aids and making sure that it's covered up. And it's for years I didn't wear my hearing aids. For years I was really ashamed of it. For years I felt like people were looking at me, and now I don't care now. But it's taken me a lot of years to get to that point. And if you've got adverts on the telly right now telling people that you should cover it up, and if I say to people, "God, you can't even see, it's great, isn't it? You've got your hair down." Just that, you know, and I have to accept, and I have to pull back and go, actually, I'm fine, you know, rather than getting defensive, go, "Oh, I don't mind, I don't care if people see my hearing aids." But people, it's that very natural thing, and I get it, I do get it, because people think it's scary, and it can be scary. Like you say, sometimes I feel very disabled, you know, I have an impairment, whatever, depending on the environment. When people say, "How much can you hear?" I don't get it. I said, well, I've got the same impairment all the time. It depends which environment I'm in to how disabled I am. That's my answer, because that is the truth. So it's about people, again, it's about people understanding the medical model, whoever, I can't remember who mentioned that before, but the medical model of trying to fix you as a person and the environment of the disabled, the environment being disabled. And I think once people really get their heads around medical model and social model disability, then things would click a little bit more and go, "Oh yeah, I get that." But again, like we said right at the beginning, it's about educating, talking about it, and educating not being formal education, education being through everything that we see, hear, talk about. It's just the norm. Sorry, that was my last run there about the Boots advert. The Boots advert. I've got issues.
There's just so much, isn't there? And it's so like hearing everyone talk about it. And I think for me, that last point you were making, Jen, is my partner is a support worker and has been for a number of years, and that's been because I don't have any disabilities, I don't have any impairments. But when he was the first person to be like, "No, that first clarification of you're disabled by society. Disability is like a verb. It's not something you have." And I think that links to representation in a way that, like, just media is just so shit in so many ways. And I heard a really great quote, which is like, people literally just think that identities are just like Pokemon cards, like that they literally just do it in that way, where you're like, "Oh yeah, we want someone in a wheelchair, we want this person and this person," but they don't, again, because they're not looking at like the store, like, sorry, I'm just thinking of so many like weird quotes coming to my head. But yeah, you're not looking at the bigger picture at all, and it's not like, it's just so disappointing. It's just continued quite disappointing, I think. And I'm throwing this out to you because I've all of you, but I've been trying to make resources for young people with film, and I've been trying to find a good sex scene which has disabled people having good sex in some way that isn't kind of made for like lols or in any other way. And I wonder if anyone could think of any good scenes that they've seen.
It's a good question, you know. No, but leave it
I
with
wish
me.
I did.
Oh, I have to do a little bit of research, everyone. Sorry, we're just looking at lots of sex scenes. It's really hard work. Leave it with me. I'll have a little think.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, I am conscious of the time, so I'm just going to quickly move on, but that was all really good points about representation, so thank you. So I guess moving on to kind of relationships, and I know Greysen touched on that a little bit, but kind of talking about what either should or could be our expectations from partners in relation to sex and disabilities. So how can we broach conversations about disabilities and sex? How can we respond better? Things like that.
Yeah, I think everyone's different, right? And I think everyone wants to have the conversation differently, and everyone wants to have it at a different time. And I think that's like perfectly reasonable and acceptable. And it totally depends on your disability and your experience and your comfort as to kind of how you want to broach those things. I think for me, in terms of like my expectations of other people, the best experiences I've had are ones where the person just listens to me and they just do the thing that I told them to do, obviously within reason. But like, you know, when I say don't touch me here, that doesn't mean like then ask me a ton of questions. I've just provided the instruction of what makes me more comfortable in this situation. there doesn't need to be a big hoo-ha about it. And then I think as well, the other thing is like when people are willing to have the conversation, you know, when I don't feel like I'm going out of my way to have that conversation. I think like a lot of the time I'm reasonably visibly disabled, but also like all I ever do is talk about disability, my disability. And so I think that, you know, people know to sometimes have these conversations with me. And I think my best experiences have been the ones where people want to have the conversation about my disability and how it affects me, whether it's in terms of a relationship or in terms of sexuality, and where they want to have a conversation about, you know, consent as well, and what we want to do, and things like that. And I think that it is just a willingness and like a lack of awkwardness, and then just being able to listen and kind of, you know, do what's needed, rather than like adding so many other layers or making the conversation significantly more difficult, I think.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned consent in there. I feel like disability can just in some aspects fall under consent culture and fostering consent culture, because when you have consent culture, that's going to make, you know, more than just sexual assault less of an issue, you know, or not less of an issue, but less common of an issue. And it just the idea that, like, you know, your regular vocal and body language check-ins in any situation of consent can carry over into situations of consent where a person also has a disability. You know, it's not mutually exclusive. It should apply to all things. And so it's kind of that, obviously have the conversation when you want to have the conversation, and have conversations with a partner who wants to have the conversation. If the partner doesn't want to have the conversation, maybe it's not, you know, the relationship for them. I think, you know, if we, obviously I don't want to whittle it down or make it a simple issue, because it isn't. It is very complex. But if you just kind of, as Jen said, you know, empathy, not sympathy, and consent, not confusion. Like if you just take those two very simple taglines and put them at the forefront of your mind when you're approaching a relationship with anyone, but also with people who have disabilities, you know, it fixes the playing field, and it makes it a lot safer and healthier.
Yeah,
I think sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to add something, is that I don't think it's just about the conversation itself at the time, in the moment as well. I think it's about the respect and the way that things play out after. I think, you know, we've talked about the fetishization of disability before, and I think, you know, occasionally people, they want to talk about how they've had sex with a disabled person, so that, I don't know, so that they can look like they're so woke or whatever, or you know, because it's something that they've kind of fetishized in that way. But then I think as well, you know, sometimes people do treat it like it's a joke, or they treat it like it's funny, and they treat it like it's not something that affects me. I think an example is, I had a partner who had told my friends, who later revealed this story at a party, that I had a seizure during sex. And I don't think that was particularly fair or respectful, but that was because they wanted to like say this thing that happened to them. And I think that sometimes we forget that these things happen, you know, it happens to me as well. And I had to, you know, it wasn't respectful to me to reveal those kind of details. And I think it's about, you know, being respectful outside of the situation. And I think I want to trust that I have a partner that I can have these conversations with openly, but then also if we break up or whatever, they don't repeat those conversations necessarily to everyone I know, or people I don't know as well. And I think that is kind of the respect as well. I think part of the worry is that even when you have the best partners at the time, they don't necessarily have the same respect for you later on. And I think it is about having that ability to trust someone with what may well be my private medical information, and my greatest worries and concerns. And yeah, I think you have to have that kind of long-term trust as well of someone.
Yeah, this is hard. It's hard. I mean, all I was going to say of that is it's really difficult, isn't it? Because, you know, you're putting I hate the word vulnerable, but you are making yourself vulnerable regardless of whether you've got an impairment or not, because you're naked with someone, and you're putting yourself in that situation. You don't know what that future self is like. You don't know what they're going to be like in 6 months time, a year time, the next day. I mean, I'm going out on a limb here, generalizing, but I've been in relationships with men, and I've been in relationships with women, and I've got endometriosis. It's really, really bad at times, and dare I say, the women that I've been with have been more understanding, because I think it comes back down to that empathy. They're able to empathize more with me than the men in my life have. And I would say my partner now, who's a man, who I've got children with, he really struggles. Really, and actually, as we speak, I'm in an I'm awaiting another operation. He cannot get his head around it, and it's not because he's a bad person, it's not because he doesn't care about me, but he is struggling to understand what that means when I say the pain that I'm in. And I think there's only a limit that humans can empathize, and there's kind of, you know, and how long people can empathize with as well, because you almost kind of get empathy fatigue or carers fatigue. You know, people can get like that, you know. And again, it's like, I get it. It's not, doesn't mean it's okay, and doesn't mean it's acceptable. And believe me, we've had some arguments about it. But it's about saying, right, okay, I know you're not a bad person, but you're struggling with this, and communication you're struggling with. Because again, I know this is generalizing, but I do think men do, generally speaking, communicate in a different way to women do. That's definitely my experience of being in a relationship with both. And it's about going, I want to come at it from this angle because that's what I expect, and actually maybe I need to come from it from this angle because that's the way we're going to be able to communicate and muddle through this. It's just like you said, right, you know, everyone is different, aren't they? Everyone's journey is different, and how we're going to communicate, it's not making people good or bad, but actually, Grace, what you said is like, maybe it's not right, maybe that's just not the right relationship for you. If you can't muddle through it after a while. But whatever it does, it shouldn't ever make you feel bad, or the ultimate thing is, what's your deal breaker? For me, if I'm ever in a situation where I feel vulnerable, that's my deal breaker. That's done. Or or I feel bad or guilty or embarrassed, deal breaker. And you've got to set those limitations for, you know, those kind of, that line in the sand where you draw it. You need to respect yourself the best you can, whatever your impairment is. That's ultimately the most important thing. Keep yourself safe.
That was all, again, really good. Thank you. I have just noticed the time, and I know that kind of everyone has a lot going on at the minute, so I don't want to drag this on too much. So I guess before I round up, I would just like to open up the conversation if anyone else has any kind of final thoughts that they would like to bring up or discuss before we go.
No, I would just, I think this is brilliant. And as I said, I'm older than you guys, and these conversations didn't happen. I didn't. And what I'm noticing is that most sex educations and most people that are talking about this are kind of, you know, under the age of 25. And, you know, that's brilliant. Things are changing. And as much as you may feel things aren't changing, they are changing. And they've changed a lot even in the last 10 years. People are having more conversations about this. The LGBT community is like, you know, is getting more and more vocal and more, you know, and it's more and more empowered. Again, way different to when I was at school. You know, to be called gay was the biggest insult at school. You know, I mean, we're going basic. So I think that when you're in it, you don't even necessarily feel like you've got far. But I think you guys need to really, you know, take a step back and see what you're doing and what you're part of and the movement that you're part of, and go, this is actually pretty amazing. This is pretty cool. We've come quite far. Just as a note, if people want to go onto our website, www.enhanceuk.org, and there's a new hub. It's completely free, and it's basically, we're calling it the sexy little sibling to LinkedIn. So it's got lots of different people on there, lots of disabled people, professional disabled people, you've got OTs, sex therapists, lots of different people working in your field. If you want to go in there and fill out your profile, if you fill out as much as you can, the more you, I mean, it will take you 10 minutes. The more information out there, the more you'll get. And also there's a free Undressing Disability book, which you can get, which is lots of people's stories about their impairments and about how they have different, giving people a blowjob and getting jaw locked and having to phone an ambulance, that kind of thing, and having seizures and all those things. But it's done in a really beautiful way, and it's really honest. So I think everybody will get quite a lot from that. So I'd love to see you guys on that. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. That all sounds so cool. I will definitely be looking it up. Yeah, does anyone else have any kind of closing thoughts? Yes, Anna.
Yeah, I wanted to I think a lot of people will watch this because they want to know what they can do differently and how they can like fix the situation. I wanted to kind of give some advice to people watching, to say, you know, what you can do either for yourself or for other people, I guess, in the case of non-disabled people. I think, again, like if you're a disabled person, I think I would encourage you to explore things if that's something that you want to do. I think that as much as we've talked about a lot of negative experiences here, I don't think that means that there aren't people who are positive and there aren't positive experiences that you can extract. And so it's not, you know, it isn't all doom and gloom. And I think that, you know, particularly there'll be mostly people in St Andrews watching this. If you are in St Andrews, like there are spaces and there are people who are inclusive and who will respect you. But I think that if you're a non-disabled person and you're looking for, you know, how can you be better if you're in a relationship or an encounter with a disabled person, I think it's some of the things that we spoke about before. It's like looking at having you know, open conversations, and I think you can learn some of those things in St Andrews. We have consent workshops, but there's also like a lot of information online. I know that there's some information on Enhance the UK's website and things like that, and just really kind of look into those things and think about how you can have those conversations and how you can be respectful and how you can listen. And then like in terms of in the general culture, you know, how can you think about and reject negative representations of disability? How can you stand up to people who are potentially treating the disabled people around you inappropriately? I think particularly in a sexual context, if I go back to the experience I said before, if one of my friends had just said, don't be an asshole, that's not a nice thing to tell other people about without that person's consent, then that would have made my life infinitely better. But instead I just had to laugh because no one else was there to say that that was inappropriate. And, you know, it's just taking those kind of steps to say, does that person necessarily want to be fetishized? Is that like a reasonable thing for you to do? Is it reasonable for you to like depict your past encounters with a disabled person in that kind of light? And are these representations of disability that I consumed necessarily actual representations of the experiences of disabled people and what they want me to take from this situation? And I think that, you know, there is a lot of good information out there in terms of you know, things like the events that Sexpression runs or the things that Enhance the UK runs and things like that. And I think it's just about or the events that I run. It's, you know, there is information to find and there is ways to improve. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo the ways that people could do that.
Yeah, again, I think intersectionality is super important and fostering that is super important. So little, I forget the word for it, advert. If you are in the LGBT community at St Andrews and are disabled, we're making a Facebook group for it. I'm the only super openly disabled person on committee this year, but you know, we have a subcommittee happening that has a disabled role on the Wellbeing subcommittee. And it's just, when you get involved, it's a lot easier to make changes. I know it's hard to get involved and it's hard to put yourself in that position of being that voice or being that person. But if anyone's interested, the more people we get involved, the more it's gonna benefit, you know, the position of disabled students on campus in the long run, specifically intersectional disabled students. And I think that's true for any environment you're in. So if you have the energy and the, you know, time for all of the crap that happens, I think getting involved.
I just also wanted to say, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's been so great, like really amazing, and I really loved it. And yeah, I just wanted to pick out a couple of things as well, in terms of mainly off the back of what Anna-Ruth said, but especially kind of speaking more directly to non-disabled people. Really, well, everyone engage with where you got your sex ed from. Actually spend time thinking what messages you received, what you think like normative is. Really look into that, and there's so much out there. We do quite a lot of read, watch, listen lists on our website, and we have a specific one around disability as well. So from that, I would really say, like, have these conversations with everyone in your life, because as a non-disabled people, because it's not up to just disabled people having to constantly remind people and do all the thinking. We have to be doing this. And also there is so much out there. Mainstream media is still quite shy in terms of that, but there is so much amazing stuff on social media, Instagram especially, and again, like podcasts and stuff like that. And really get, I really love sex and relationships, because there's so much in it and it's amazing and it's really exciting. But yeah, I just really encourage you to like actually read up and think about things, and again, have the conversations as well. And yeah, and go to events that, I mean, if they're events which invite, like, which you'd welcome in, it's appropriate, but go to events and really like engage with communities and think about stuff, because it's really, really important for everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Like I said at the start, I've been wanting to do this event for quite a long time now, and I'm just so happy that we've been able to do it. And yeah, everyone's brought like such a great input, so thank you so much. And I really would like to keep in touch and potentially work together in the future. Yeah, I guess I should kind of wrap things up to stop the recording, and then Anna-Ruth, is it going to be posted Friday after next? Is that the plan?
I think so, but I think I'd have to check with Ellis. But yeah, I'll send everyone a link when it's up.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you again.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.